Hi, welcome. My name is Mara. I'm the person in the picture holding the cup of tea. To my left is Humphrey, and right in the front here, that is Norman. They're both very cute. Don't worry, you get to see more of them. First, though, some background information. Because of this coronavirus, we are stuck. We can't go out as much as we would normally, and everything is a bit odd. How we interact with friends and family, and how we shop, and to some extent, the way we work. And I want to acknowledge that there is a depressing number of people who have it so much worse than me, who can, after all, just sit in her garden and muse or become philosophical. That said, I want to do something about one of the biggest disappointments for me, and that is that we have had to postpone our Notes from a Biscuit Tin conversation in Munich. Notes from a Biscuit Tin brings together philosophy and poetry to discuss themes that were of interest to the philosopher Mary Midgley. The theme for Munich was beasts, and I would have been joined by the lovely Ulrike Dresner. There would have been biscuits, both real ones and thoughts and inspiration from Mary Midgley's work. So that was the plan, and we have postponed that until February, supposedly. Meanwhile, I'm stuck in our garden with our two lovely rescue dogs. So there's Humphrey, who's 7.5, and we got him in 2014 from a Munich shelter. And then there is Norman, 1.5 year, American Bulldog or something, who joined us shortly before the lockdown. I say rescue because that is what you say when you didn't buy your dog as a puppy from a breeder but took on a so-called unwanted dog. You then have rescue dogs. But in my opinion, Humphrey and Norman are rescue dogs because especially these days they just keep me thinking, laughing, writing, and importantly they remind me over and again that I'm an animal as well. Which brings me to one of Mary Midgley's concerns, that is, that we are animals. We are not just like them. Animals are the group to which people belong. And you can find that view already in the paper that Ulrike and I wanted to discuss, the concept of beastliness. So the concept of beastliness is one of Midgley's early papers, and the title already indicates that a lot is going on. So philosophy, ethics, and animal behavior. I just wanted to mention five such concerns that she has. First is Midgley's ongoing interest in human nature. Second, her intuition that there is really something like human nature, just as there is something like a canine nature or a feline nature, and that leads her to think that a comparative, ethologically informed perspective is the best in which to do philosophy, because that will help us refute myths about other animals and also myths about humans, like the idea that all animals are beasts and are sort of the counterpart to humans, but then also that there's something like the inner beast, which would be responsible for everything that is problematic about humans, like emotions or something like that. Right. I would also suggest that concepts of human nature will always influence our moral self-understanding. If, for instance, it does not entail, if it does not entail recognition that we too are animals who come with natural virtues and vices, we might seriously misconceive ourselves as, say, rational essences or something like this. Angels. Her fourth concern, though, is with the positive and open instincts in humans, like caring, friendship, loyalty, or sociality. The idea is that both classes of instincts, these open instincts, can be shaped to some extent. I mean, we're trying this with these ones as well, shaping their instincts. This one is just instinctively watching out for the cat, the neighbours. Anyways, finally Midgley speaks about the conditions of social life that are important for people to be able to structure their lives in meaningful ways, and she mentions two in particular, and she has much to say about that in her later books, which are all characterized by an exceptionally clear and witty style. This is ridiculous. Okay, now the baby has left the scene for a moment, and we'll try again. Just a few finishing sentences on the concept of beastliness, because I feel like now, at a time when half of humanity is forced into isolation, it is highly likely that we will have to change in many ways. And Midgley's writing is so interesting because she always manages to stay clear between, or stay away from essentialism on the one hand and pure nihilism about human nature on the other. And in a way, for her, it's clear that we are born as social animals, mammals, that come with a certain life form, but that we grow into this life form, and by doing so, we change. So I was just thinking that reading some of Midgley's ideas about beasts and man, and how she thinks about change and what needs to change, but also what might be the backbone of humanity and what we might want to preserve, is rather inspiring at this point in time. So I won't say anything big picture here, but zoom in on one aspect. After all, we are under lockdown because of a pandemic that is quite likely due to how we treat other animals. So let's talk about Midgley's contextualist animal ethics then, which she, among other places or works of her, develops in the book Animals and Why They Matter. And she develops a perspective in animal ethics that, of course, responds to other efforts that have been going on before her, which in turn, of course, are responses to what has gone on before that. So people like Peter Singer or Tom Regan have responded to what Midgley calls strategies of absolute dismissal. That means that there are strategies to exclude animals from moral consideration. Some of the dismissal has been relative, of course, as when people do care about their dogs, but not about the dogs in the labs, for instance. However, Midgley does emphasize that even with people who care about animals to some extent, when things become more problematic, they still consider the strategy of absolute dismissal a logical option. That is, they pretend that they could, after all, absolutely dismiss other animals. So most arguments used in such strategies are, and I quote Midgley, invented to justify a position which is not really questioned because it is already habitual or appeals to self-interest, end of quote. So think about it. Given that it is self-serving and widespread that humans use other animals for their purposes, I don't have to muster a lot of intellectual energy in order to defend these practices. Most people agree already. However, Midgley says, and I quote her again, these arguments are an unimpressive lot, and they have been getting increasingly out of kilter with the rest of our thinking. And Midgley decides to spend a chapter, one entire chapter, on one of the unimpressive arguments, which is the idea that we are in a lifeboat situation vis-a-vis other animals, and that therefore, since resources are scarce, we cannot take their lives seriously. Now, Midgley does a great job dispelling this lifeboat dilemma as a myth that does not help to account for both the various real conflicts that occur in human-animal relations and the multiple opportunities to engender change and choice. Now, consider this. Lifeboat situations are defined by the fact that there is only one tragic choice to be made. However, eating animals or not, hunting them for sports or not, using them in research or not, or even keeping them as pets or not, are not tragic choices. Human beings have a lot more wiggle room here, and so conceiving of these choices as lifeboat dilemmas is clearly misleading. So Midgley dispels this myth in a very interesting discussion of the relevance of kinship and other forms of social nearness, and I will come to that in the next part when I turn to her constructive ideas about the mixed human-animal community, and I take it that Norman and Humphrey are already rather curious about that. Before that, however, I want to mention her second argument, which is that nature is not always read in tooth and claw. Hence, that life is not just about competition, but also about cooperation. The reasons for that is mutual dependence at a very deep level. You can find that on pages 24 and 25 in her book. Now, Michi alerted us to the mutual dependence of humans and other animals already 40 years ago, and we haven't taken this on board. And see where we are now. So I think it is high time to revisit her ideas about our relations to animals. These have to do with the mixed community. So that's one of the ideas that you can find in chapter 10 of the book. And two ideas I find particularly inspiring. So the first is that there is such a thing as the inner child, and this Midgley thinks that this inner child is a source of inner charm and creativity and pleasure. I'm not sure whether that's true for all children, but the inner child at least is supposed to be a source of pleasure first and foremost. She thinks that with this inner child is associated what she calls the capacity for widely extended sympathy, and this sympathy is ultimately non-anthropocentric in nature, and in fact it is needed in order to become what Midgley calls true citizens of the world. So there's another quote that I wanted to read to you, which is: "The capacity for widely extended sympathy for social horizons not limited to one's familiar group is certainly part of this childish spontaneity. It is also the window through which interest in creatures of other species enters our lives, both in childhood and, if we do not firmly close it, the window, in later life as well." Right, so that's food for thought, right? So the point I want to make is that this is something we all recognize when we, I don't know, in ourselves. I mean, when we enjoy YouTube clips of animals, or if we watch David Attenborough and what have you. But in Mitchie's work, I think it's much more than just idle entertainment. It's really the precondition for the mixed community to work. The second idea that is relevant in order to understand the mixed community, and that is Midgley's insistence on the fact that we can understand animals quite well. And that has to be understood in the context of some people doubting that. So, Midgley says, well, these skeptics are ignoring the fact that we have managed to understand animals already, because at least some of them, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to domesticate them. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this piece of beastly, or rather animal-assisted philosophy, and would like to learn more, which is why I've put down the references, of course, and some suggestions for further reading. Thank you very much for watching, and please do take care.